event is coming soon. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite Creator.
My fellow subscribers, YouTube has started to shut down channels that don't agree with their views and blaming their decision on their guidelines. This is the highest form of censorship controlled by the cabal to keep us from knowing the truth. There has been several channels terminated by their so-called violation of their guidelines, including our sister channel, Event is Coming Soon, and 3 other sister channels of ours. We feel it's a matter of time before they create a violation of their guidelines to shut this channel down. We have created a channel on Daily Motion, which is an alternative to YouTube. Please go to dailymotion.com and subscribe and view our videos as well. Tell your friends also that we have our new channel, The Event is Coming Soon, on dailymotion.com. Let's unite and keep this very important channel alive. Victory of the Light.
An in-depth look into WHO really controls the U.S. government, deep state, because IT is not the people. By Kali Brown. If you're familiar with CE's content, you may have noticed that we frequently refer to the shadow government, the deep state, the cabal, the Illuminati, and the elite. We often use these words synonymously, though some of these terms have slightly different meanings. If you're unfamiliar with the true meanings of these terms, then this article is for you. This article will examine what the shadow government is, what people and which companies fall within it, and how they gained so much control over the U.S. government and society in general. What do shadow government and deep state mean? Shadow government and deep state are both political terms in a sense, as they're used to define the groups of people who control the U.S. government. I'm not referring to the people within political parties that perceivably control the system, not the presidents or Congress, but the individuals and the companies who control the government and influence policies and decisions. The very definition of the shadow government lies within the term itself. It's the real government entity that hides within the shadows, making all of the important decisions in secret. Their political agenda and true motives are completely hidden from the public. These aren't the people you see on mainstream media, nor are they the people you vote for. They're the individuals who lurk in the shadows, which is precisely how they're able to maintain control over the population, feeding the illusion of democracy. The term deep state refers to a state within a state, a group of people who have so much control inside of a state that they don't actually have to abide by the same laws, largely because they're the ones creating them. The deep state can even include elements of the government, including the Pentagon, which has acted immune to many laws. Up until this year, for instance, they had never been audited, despite the fact that this is illegal and an astounding $10 trillion in taxpayer money had gone completely unaccounted for since 1996. According to an in-depth report by journalist Mike Lofgren, the deep state does not consist of the entire government. It is a hybrid of national security and law enforcement agencies, the Department of Defense, the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, the Central Intelligence Agency and the Justice Department. I also include the Department of the Treasury because of its jurisdiction over financial flows, its enforcement of international sanctions and its organic symbiosis with Wall Street. Numerous politicians have publicly discussed the people who secretly control the U.S. political system, and are creating laws and bending them. As John F. Hyland, former mayor of New York City, explained, "The real menace of our republic is the invisible government, which like a giant octopus sprawls its slimy legs over our cities, states and nation. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties. And, control the majority of the newspapers and magazines in this country. They use the columns of these papers to club into submission or drive out of office public officials who refuse to do the bidding of the powerful corrupt cliques which compose the invisible government. It operates under cover of a self-created screen, and seizes our executive officers, legislative bodies, schools, courts, newspapers and every agency created for the public protection. Senator Daniel K. Inouye, a high-ranking Asian American politician, has also stated, there exists a shadowy government with its own air force, its own navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself. Theodore Roosevelt, former President of the United States, stated, political parties exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of the people. From these great tasks both of the old parties have turned aside. Instead of instruments to promote the general welfare they have become the tools of corrupt interests, which use them impartially to serve their selfish purposes. Behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people. To destroy this invisible government, to dissolve the unholy alliance between corrupt business and corrupt politics, is the first task of the statesmanship of the day. When former President Eisenhower coined the term military-industrial complex, his main concern was the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power. After him, former President John F. Kennedy, JFK warned citizens that we are living in a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific and political operations. He went on to state that its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. Even before both of these two, former U.S. President Woodrow Wilson revealed, "Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States, in the field of commerce and manufacture, are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." Source: the following video from Thrive Movement, a documentary created by the heir to Procter & Gamble, Foster Gamble, perfectly explains how this system works. Who is a part of the shadow government and the deep state? Since the shadow government and the deep state are fairly broad terms to define the people and the corporations that control the government, they include a lot of people and a lot of corporations. To begin, the shadow government includes billionaire families like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds became very wealthy in the 1700s off the banking system, and then spread out all over Europe, gaining more power through other industries. The family also has strategic marital ties to big names such as DuPont, Hilton, and Guinness. However, the Rothschilds are most well known for their control over the American Federal Reserve Bank, though they own countless big banks all over the world. Check out this CE article to further understand how big banks actually work and gain control over society. The Rockefellers have their hands in practically every industry, including banking, health, oil, food, and more. Over a century ago, the Carnegie and Rockefeller Foundations began to alter university medical curricula to reflect a greater focus on pharmaceuticals so they could increase their profits. They put their money into drug-based research and made that the main focus of modern-day healthcare. Since then, the Rockefellers and banking elite have been able to control and profit from the drug industry. The AMA, the largest association of physicians in the U.S., enforces the drug treatment paradigm by heavily lobbying Congress and publishing one of the most influential journals, JAMA, which is largely funded by pharmaceutical advertisers. Mainstream media networks are owned by fewer than 5 multinational corporations, and all of these corporations have ties to the Rothschild and Rockefeller families. The Rockefellers were also involved in the creation of the United Nations, UN, which you can read more about in our CE article here. This may not raise red flags to those who aren't familiar with the Rockefeller family, but consider this: the UN was created in 1945 as a result of World War II. In practically every global conflict, something is created out of that conflict to give the illusion that whatever is created will solve it. Have you ever thought that the people who created the conflict are doing so they can propose the solution in order to manipulate the population and gain further power? George Soros is another key member of the shadow government, disguised as a philanthropic billionaire. His donations seem heartfelt and meaningful, but if you look a little closer, you'll realize that every donation he makes has an ulterior motive behind it, helping to secure his control over the political landscape and in turn profit from it. Similar to the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, he has secured his political control all over the US and in other places like Europe and holds many strategic investments, including in the DNC and in organizations that support the DNC. You can read more about George Soros in our CE articles here and here. Many large corporations fall into the shadow government as well. Sony is one of these corporations, as the CIA and the government have strong ties to the movie industry. In a statement made last year, WikiLeaks wrote, "The Sony archives show that behind the scenes this is an influential corporation, with ties to the White House. There are almost 100 U.S. government email addresses in the archive, with an ability to impact laws and policies, and with connections to the U.S. military-industrial complex." You can read more about that in our CE article here. The list of corporations that could be seen as members of the shadow government goes on and on: ExxonMobil, Monsanto, Big Pharma companies, Corrections Corporations of America, Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, etc., American Bail Coalition, other big oil corporations, big players in the factory farming industry, and more. Corporate members of the deep state or the military-industrial complex include big military contractors like Lockheed Martin. According to William Harding, the director of the Arms and Security Project at the Center for International Policy, contractors will periodically intervene to try to stop practices that would make them more accountable. How they influence legislation and gain control over the government. It's clear that corporations have a strong hold on government regulations. Why else would chemicals be put in our food and the environment? Even the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has strong ties to oil companies, despite the fact that they're supposedly the government agency that protects the environment. Learn more here. The simple answer to this question: money, the promise to gain more control over the population, and lobbying efforts. The shadow government can manipulate, or in some cases, create legislation through either close ties to politicians or even organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC. ALEC is a conservative group comprised of state legislators and corporate leaders that allows corporations to help write, or in some cases, just hand over legislation that the official lawmakers can then take credit for and formally propose. ALEC has been responsible for numerous immoral bills, including those that aim to lower minimum wage, suppress voter rights, pro-gun laws, ag, animal cruelty bills, and more. The Center for Media and Democracy, CMD, conducted research into ALEC's funding while looking into ExxonMobil and the company's wrongdoings regarding climate change denial. CMD found that 98% of ALEC's funding comes from private sources other than state legislators. This means that ALEC is basically entirely funded by global corporations, including ExxonMobil. Political satirist John Oliver explains this in detail below. ALEC has played a crucial role in influencing laws surrounding gun control, the prison system, voting laws, environmental policies, animal cruelty laws, minimum wage, and more. ALEC-backed legislation is not created for the people, but rather, designed so corporations can increase their profits and create loopholes so they don't get in trouble with the law. You can read more about ALEC in our CE article here. There are tons of other examples of corporations influencing the government outside of ALEC as well. One court case addressed the EPA's ties to Monsanto, bending laws and lying about the environmental and health issues involved with the company's products, GMOs, herbicide Roundup, etc. You can read more about that here. Big Pharma is another industry with close ties to the government. Even though it's illegal for Big Pharma to advertise drugs in other countries, it's completely legal in North America. The advertisements are often misleading, overstating the benefits and completely omitting the risks or potential side effects, or simply putting them in tiny, illegible letters. Although the FDA has stepped in multiple times, sending pharmaceutical companies warning letters or even forcing them to take down their ads because they are false, misleading, and/or exaggerate the effects of their drugs, this is still an ongoing issue. Lobbying expenditures by the pharmaceutical industry have been increasing every year and hit an all-time high of $273 million in 2009. This money is then used to influence lawmakers and politicians to shape pending legislation. A recent study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association conducted by a team from Yale University found that 1 in 3 FDA-approved pharmaceutical drugs have safety issues. Big Pharma pressured the FDA to speed up their drug approval process, and this is what happened as a result. You can read more about that here. The U.S. government also holds strong ties to the meat and dairy industries. The government has helped food providers become more dairy-based, and implemented milk education into school programs. Check out this video that elaborates on the government's ties to the dairy industry here. The USDA has heavy ties to many advertisements and campaigns encouraging consumers to purchase meat. The U.S. government spends $38 billion annually to subsidize the meat and dairy industries, in comparison to only 0.04% of that on fruits and vegetables. If the government didn't benefit from meat and dairy sales, our recommended intake of animal products would look significantly different. Instead, the USDA Food Guide Pyramid states you should eat 2-3 servings of milk, yogurt, and cheese, despite the fact that only 75% of people can actually digest milk properly, as well as 2-3 servings of meat, poultry, fish, dry beans, eggs, and nuts per day. What the food guide doesn't mention is that numerous studies have proven that meat and dairy consumption can cause cancer, heart disease, obesity, and many more health complications. Lastly, another crucial way the deep state gains control over the public and the government is through false flag terrorism. Yes, the government is involved with the creation of these terrorist attacks and the infiltration of other countries, but it's not just the U.S. government that profits off war and terror. False flag terrorism is the idea that a government would stage a terrorist attack in a country, even their own, in order to justify war and the infiltration of a foreign country for their own purposes, whether that be for money, oil, etc. It's also used to heighten a state of fear and security within their own country, and in order to do so, they need a villain. For example, in the case of 9/11 it was Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. As former British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook explains, the truth is, there is no Islamic army or terrorist group called Al-Qaeda, and any informed intelligence officer knows this. But, there is a propaganda campaign to make the public believe in the presence of an intensified entity representing the devil only in order to drive TV watchers to accept a unified international leadership for a war against terrorism. In essence, war and chaos are profitable businesses, and they've been used by the shadow government and the deep state for many years to not only take over nations, but to control the masses using fear as well. War is often just a collaborative effort between powerful individuals to play out big-picture plans through creating conflict and justifying war. Then, when this heightened fear state occurs in society, people don't question terrorist bills and surveillance because they're implemented in the name of national security. I served in all commissioned ranks from second lieutenant to major general. And during that period, I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. General Smedley Butler, one of the highest-ranking generals in American history. The subject of war and terror also relates to the New World Order, as this is often the overarching goal when it comes to the U.S. invading other countries or the elite creating chaos and terror in other countries. The New World Order is the supposed goal of a handful of global elitists who are pushing for a one-world government and a heightened national security state. This group, often referred to as the cabal, the shadow government, the deep state, the elite, has been using foreign threats to heighten security, strip us of our rights, and invade other countries. The entire world is practically covered with U.S. military bases and big banks owned by the Rothschilds, with the exception of only a few countries. Why this is important information. Many news organizations and people refuse to discuss the shadow government and the deep state, whether that's because they fear the negativity surrounding the subject or because they're owned and funded by these groups of people. Amber Lyon is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning journalist at CNN who went on record stating that mainstream media outlets are routinely paid by the U.S. government as well as by foreign governments to selectively report and manipulate information on specific events. She has also admitted that the U.S. government has editorial control over mainstream media content. This isn't anything new. The CIA's Operation Mockingbird is the government program referring to its interest and relations with mainstream media. Mockingbird stemmed from the CIA's forerunner, the Office for Strategic Services, OSS, 1942-47, which, during World War II, created a working relationship with journalists and psychological warfare experts operating primarily in the European theater. It's clear that the truth has been hidden from us for a long time, but it's crucial that we don't perceive this information as scary, but rather as empowering. If we fear the shadow government and refuse to discuss them, then we're feeding into their perpetual control over the system. However, if we shed light on this subject and explain to others how our political system actually works, then real, sustainable change can actually occur. Democracy only gives you the illusion of freedom and human rights, because only without an overarching, elite-serving government could you truly have these things.
If you like our channel, please subscribe and click the bell to be notified of our new videos. Feel free to share on your social media. Thanks for watching. See you next time.